You're listening to Every Day's a Saturday USMC Veteran Podcast.
Now introducing your host of Every Day's a Saturday USMC Veteran, the one-man show, Brian Roof.
Hey, what's going on, friends and fam? Thank you guys so much for joining Every Day's Saturday with me, your host, Brian Roof. I'm so excited to get going on this next interview. But before we get going, I'd like to say a special thanks to podcastguest.com. Appreciate you guys for, giving me a whole bunch of great guests to have on the show. And that's exactly how I got my next guest. My next guest is a Navy veteran. And what's kind of unique about him is that he served on the enlisted and officer side. So we've actually gotten to listen to quite a few of these stories lately. So I'm excited to hear about his. He's also an author, a podcast host of a ranked number 1 in alternative health. And here to tell his story and all about himself is John R. Miles. What's going on?
Hoorah. Thank you, Brian, for having me today. It's such an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you taking the time to come on and talk to all of us and tell us all about your story and talk about your, the story behind you as well. And let's get to know all about you, where you grew up and what made you decide to go in the Navy and what you do in the Navy, all that good stuff.
Yeah, I can't wait to tackle it all. And I have a special affinity for the Marine Corps because I lived my entire childhood under a roof of a Force Recon Marine. So there you go.
Ooh. Yeah. I imagine things were tight around that house.
Now, I tell you, in my entire life, I'm not sure I have ever seen my father cry. And that includes seeing him put a drill bit right through his hand. He is one tough dude. I will tell you that.
Literally. Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. And it's more interesting that you ended up going Navy route and stuff. I mean, did he have anything to say about that and stuff as well?
Yeah, we talked about it a lot. I unfortunately had terrible allergies. And in fact, one of my medical exams, as I was looking back when I applied to the VA, actually said not recommended that you go into the Marine Corps because of all the allergies that you have. So I hate to use that as an excuse, but man, I used to be miserable. So when we would have been in the field, etc., that would have definitely had its repercussions.
Absolutely. So he ended up going Navy. Now talk about, what did you end up choosing and what initially drove you to go into the Navy? Just because your dad had served? I mean, did you have a hunger in your heart after that? Because a lot of, it goes kind of either way. I mean, sometimes when you have your parent and they were, in a service, you don't want to touch it, right? You're like, hell no, I don't want to be like them. My kids are kind of more like that.
Yeah.
Or you got someone who's like, I want to join, but I don't want to necessarily go and be what my parent was.
Well, I don't think it was really in the picture until I was probably a sophomore in high school. And both my grandfather and my father served. My grandfather was in Army Airborne and was in World War II. And my father obviously was in the Marine Corps and served in Cambodia before we went into Vietnam. And I guess looking at both of them and the values that it brought to their lives, it really, as I got older and I was trying to think about, I could go down this typical path that my family did where we went to college, or I could take this different road that was going to teach me leadership, core values, a new belief system, express my courage muscles, all of that. And I think it was all those things that kind of led me down the path to want to join the military and serve the country. And why the Navy? I guess as I was looking at my opportunities, just thought that the Navy offered the most robust choice of things that I could get exposure to. And at that point, I didn't know if I wanted to be on subs, on ships, if I wanted to fly, what I wanted to do. But I thought it kind of gave you all of those. Plus, if you wanted to do more of the ground pounder, you could do special warfare, etc. So to me, it offered a whole bunch of different opportunities.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, before I ended up talking to the Marine Corps, I had already talked to the Army, and that recruiter kind of turned me off to the Army. He just was too too much, you know. And then I went in and saw the Navy, and I don't know. They seem like they had a lot of different opportunities in terms of jobs and stuff like that. And the only thing is, I felt like for them, I think I was like my ASVAB maybe wasn't good enough or something to go into the job I wanted to. So I was just like, I wasn't not really wanting to retake no ASVAB either. But so
Well,
what job did you end up choosing while you were in the Navy?
Well, I started out as a radio tech and then went to the Naval Academy Prep School, and then through that, commissioned through the Naval Academy. And upon graduation, I actually became what they call now an information warfare officer. But at the time, we were called cryptologic officers. And so it was really an extension of what I had done on the enlisted side. But I thought it was just fascinating because when you work for the NSA, you really get exposure to everything. To me, it's kind of like working in a company where you're in HR, maybe finance, IT, and you kind of see everything that goes on in the company. The same thing to me happens when you do something like intelligence, or in my case, information warfare, because you get to experience all the different disciplines. And I loved it. I was what they called early on a direct support officer. So I got to fly an aircraft, got to go on subs, got to go on aircraft carriers,
Dang.
destroyers, cruisers, deployed with SEAL teams. So it really was a very rewarding uh, career for me while I was doing it, and exposed me to all the things when I was in high school I hoped I would get exposure to.
Now, in terms of going to the Naval Academy, now did you already have schooling prior to that, or is that something you ended up having to apply for, getting selected for? I mean, what? How did that whole process work?
Well, when I came into the Navy, my commanding officer, who was a Naval Academy grad, recommended me. He saw the potential, and I had scored really high on my test scores, and he thought that my potential would be better served being an officer. And that's what led me to go to the Naval Academy Prep School, which was great because in that year that you're at the prep school, they're basically teaching you the majority of the courses that you're going to take as a plebe. So for me, it was very advantageous. Not only did I meet a whole bunch of classmates that would make going through that plebe year much easier, but academically, I wasn't challenged because I was redoing almost all the courses that we took our plebe year. So for me, it served a multitude of purposes, and it also got you used to what the academy was going to be like, and the rigors that you were going to have to go through in balancing your academic load, the military load, and your extracurricular activity load.
How long have you already been in at this point?
A
Right
couple of
before
years.
you, a couple years. So yeah, I mean that'd be kind of a transition too, right? I mean after being enlisted for so long, and then boom, you come in to be an officer. But I think there's even a better appreciation. I think there's a huge difference to me from the officers who actually came within, the ranks, so to speak, versus right out of school, OCS, and right into the fleet. Because there's a whole thing, there's an element that you don't really understand with when it comes to the different units and actually the people on the ground on the boots, the boots on the ground, so to speak. I mean,
Man, well, I'll tell you one thing that I learned from day one is that, especially when you're at the Naval Academy, they never teach you what the real world is like. And I don't think you achieve the real world experience by being around a bunch of officers. To me, I always thought that the most time and investment that you needed to put in was with your NCOs and, in my case, my senior chief or my chief, because that was going to determine success or failure, that relationship that I had with him or her.
And you have a little bit of an understanding when it comes to the morale, right? And because you've been there yourself, right, in the suck, and being that one, being told to do something that you're not really, a fan of doing. Um, but now you're flip side. Now you're doing that right now, or putting people in charge of that kind of stuff. So now you have a different, but you have more of appreciation, I would say, than, like I said, someone just straight out and they're brand new and they only go through the training, and you're not only going to get so much from that. Like I said, you're
Yeah,
never
I
going
mean,
to
I'll
get
give
the
you a great
morale flavor and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a great example. I remember my first deployment as an officer. I went out with a lieutenant. At the time I was an ensign, who I was shadowing. And I remember going on this ship, and this officer really isolated himself from the rest of the ship. So he would go to meals with the other officers, but the vast majority of the time he would go up into our skiff and not venture and do anything else on the ship. And so we never really formed any bonds with the rest of the ship, etc. And I saw through that that in doing so, you're really creating an us versus them type of mentality, and the ship is never ever going to embrace you as being part of the crew. So when I started getting my opportunities to lead teams, the first thing I would do was volunteer myself and the teams I was leading for watches. I don't care if it was doing underway replenishments. I didn't care if it was standing watch in the CIC or on the bridge. We acted as if we were part of the crew. And in doing so, we were brought in very quickly and treated like we were part of the crew. And I would encourage them to do everything from getting into card games to volunteering for mess duty, whatever it took, doing drills when we had battle operations. It didn't matter as long as we were helping out that ship that we were on or submarine, because I didn't ever go on any ship except maybe an aircraft carrier where they had the proper staffing. All of them needed more people. Every single one of them was short officers. And so if I could take watches, it helped the other officers on board. It allowed them to get sleep, maybe an extra meal. And to me, it really was the make it or break it, I think, in the success that I had and for the medals that myself and my team were awarded, because those commanding officers felt like we were part of their crew.
See, and that's just it. I think that's one of the bigger things when it comes to officers that once were enlisted, is that they already know how to act like the crew, right? Or they know how the crew kind of acts. You already know how they kind of intermingle. Someone that's never been around that kind of environment doesn't understand that, right? It's a different thing, especially in the military. And when you got these units that some of these guys been with each other for a while, and they like to joke around and do things that you're like, whoa, like, but you were enlisted. You were probably one of those guys at one point in time playing and doing all those things. So you kind of have more of an understanding versus some guy coming in like, what is this? Like, what are these guys doing? That's why I think
Well,
it's almost like it's a necessary thing for officers to almost get a piece of that enlisted side, and they should probably think more. And I think they do it more. I think it's the CISIP or something like that, or I forgot what someone called it, but I think they do encourage it a lot more now on the listed side, which that wasn't a thing when I was in, where they were trying to encourage enlisted guys to go into being officers. But now it is, I think it's more that they're starting to see the value from it, right? They're starting to see the value of having their leaders be guys that were once in that suck.
Yeah, I've been trying to guide my niece who wants to go in the military. She just graduated from high school. And as I've been observing these programs, Space Force, the Army, the Air Force all have programs that they advertise for people going in, where coming in, you have a clear path if you test well enough to become an officer. And to me, that is really smart because I think, as to the point that you're saying, some of the best officers I ever served with were Mustangs. And having that experience really paves the way for an authentic and service-based leader.
Right. I would agree 100%. And, and I think they're starting to do more of that too, because they're starting to see that it's hard to fill some of these billets now, right? I mean, we're starting to have a hard time with retention and even getting people in. I know the Navy's really starting to kind of move it down a little bit so people can kind of get in now. So I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean,
the ones that are smart out there should be capitalizing on some of these opportunities that are going to be there, low hanging fruit for some of these ambitious ones, because a lot of them are sitting back waiting for stuff.
yeah, I'm not the most up on it, although from what I understand, the Marine Corps is the only service that has actually met their manning requirements. I don't think any of the other services has. So, and from what I understand, I thought the Army was the farthest behind. I could be wrong, but I know in the Navy, it's crazy. You can now, I was reading, get in your mid 30s, which is just
Yeah,
crazy when you think about it.
I think even in the Marine Corps, they must have, because I saw a 34-year-old was just went through boot camp, and I was like, I thought it was 27. So I mean, either he had some kind of a waiver, or they are starting to change the age requirement where they're just like, hey, at this point in time, we'll just take any willing and able body. Because I think even with the Navy, you don't even have to have a diploma anymore. Which I would thought that was kind of shocking, right? Like, I'm sure you still got to test and stuff, but
Yeah.
it's kind of crazy to see where they're kind of lowering their standards. But I guess if we got to get the job done, I mean, shoot, anybody willing and able, come on through. But so talk a little bit more about your Navy career and how you kind of progressed, through your ranks once you got into the officer side, and and then what made you end up finally saying, all right, enough's enough, and I'd rather leave and do something else, or were you forced to leave? I mean,
No, I went from doing that direct support job that I had to, I was fortunate when I was at the Naval Academy. We have these things, they're called sponsor families, who basically adopt you when you're a plebe and they give you a haven where it feels like you're going to somebody's house and you get the creature comforts that you miss from home. It's kind of a nice bridge because you can't go home to a family who's willing to support you. And I was lucky enough to have just a phenomenal sponsor family. And the gentleman who was the father ended up becoming the top civilian leader. He was an SCS level at NSA. And so he was the number 2 guy to Admiral Mike McConnell when I was serving. And they had this opportunity come up where they were looking to find ways to augment NSA operatives into special forces teams. And he knew that I had wanted to do that, had got medically disqualified because of the allergies and some traumatic brain injuries that I had, to do it as a direct commissioning. but asked me if it was something I would want to do. And of course, I jumped on it. So I got to hand select a team of 12 operators who we put them through Ranger School because we just didn't know if they were going to be able to get through the BUDS program, basic underwater demolition school training. And then we actually trained with Special Warfare Unit 10 out of Rota, Spain, which is a training command, and then would augment their missions by sending 2-member teams with them to provide different intelligence oversight capabilities. And it was pretty interesting to me back in that time, which would have been, kind of the mid 90s, how little intelligence, and especially in field intelligence, whether it was Green Berets, Rangers, forward observers, or the SEAL teams, had to augment and better perform their mission. So it was a really valuable service to them. And it's now become, over time, its own discipline, where they have a whole team that this is all they do. And now they do send them through BUDS and other things. But I was really honored to get to start that whole program, and did 4 or 5 deployments myself. So that took me into Northern Africa. I deployed with them a few times into Iraq, and also deployed into the Baltics during the war years there, where we were trying to intercede between the Serbians and Bosnians, etc. And then from there, the most unexpected thing happened. I got short selected as a lieutenant junior grade to go into a lieutenant commander, so an 04 billet, at the Joint Interagency Task Force in Key West, Florida, that had the mission of thwarting counter drugs or drug operations coming into the United States. And so I got to work on a 2-star staff and was the XO of the NSA unit that was attached to this command. And that was another extremely rewarding opportunity, because it as a young guy in my 20s, I was briefing the vice president, cabinet members, admirals, congressmen, senators, because all of these dignitaries knew about the bases in Key West, and that they would write these trips off because they could use these special flag-based housing that they could get for a weekend. And then they would come in to get briefings from us so they could write off their trip, so to speak. But for me, it was great, because on Saturdays is when we would do these briefings. And I can't tell you the number of dignitaries I got to brief, and to have that experience at that young an age was incredible. The other incredible thing was, there are very few jobs where you can come in at the start of your day, and at the end of it, you have a drug interdiction or something that shows you tangible results for the work effort that you're putting in. And when I was there, we took down hundreds and hundreds of tons of cocaine, heroin, whatever you have. And so all of that to me was extremely fascinating and rewarding. And you asked, why did I get out? Well, at the tail end of that tour of duty, in addition to having all the services there, we had Customs, DEA, CIA, obviously NSA, etc., FBI, all
ATF.
all part of this command. And so all of them approached me and said, because of your security clearance, everything else, we'd love for you to join us. So I ended up going down the process of applying to 4 or 5 of them, getting accepted by each one, which was a pretty arduous process at the time. I think I had to take 5 different rounds of polygraphs and all their testing, and then ended up selecting
questions.
and then and then I ended up selecting the FBI, and I got out, and man, I'm telling you, literally 3 days before I'm supposed to go to Quantico, it was either Thursday or Friday, I'm supposed to report on a Monday, I get a call from my detailer, and this was kind of in September of the year. It was the Clinton administration. It was one of the first times, if not the first time, Congress couldn't pass a budget. And so my class got recycled, and man, I thought it was going to be a short time thing. And I was so naive. 4 years later, basically, is when I eventually got the call back. And in between that point, and 4 years later, I had a kid. I was in the middle of my MBA, and I was now working for Booz Allen and living in San Diego, and kind of the whole opportunity passed me by. So in the interim, I went into the reserves, and I guess what the reason I got out of the reserves, and kind of regret it today, but at the time I just had too much going on. My plate was just too full, and I couldn't handle anything else on top of working 70 hours weeks, having a newborn, and trying to complete an MBA program.
That's pretty much why the military has their saying. If they wanted you to have wife and kids, they would have issued you them. You know what I mean? So that, I mean, you know, it gets to be rough, especially when you have a family and kids are expensive. And I mean, yeah, that can definitely alter your, I mean, 4 years is a long time too, right? I mean, and for you at that point in time, you would have to change a lot of things, and you still have to pass, and there's just so many unknowns, and now you have certainty that you've already probably worked towards. So I mean, I imagine that was really rough.
Well, it was. And, you know, at Booz Allen, I was now earning far more than I would have as an FBI agent. And
Yeah.
I'm now behind where my classmates would have been, you know, 2, 3 years behind, who went into the FBI, and they weren't going to give me any additional, you know, I was still going in at the same GS level that I would have gone in to begin with. So I just, at that point, didn't see the upside to going back, and life, you know, was just in a different place.
Now, are you kind of glad that you didn't go that route, or is there a part of you that wishes you would have?
Man, I think there's a big part of me that, looking back, I guess as a kid, I had always saw myself in these action-packed jobs where I wasn't sitting behind a desk. I was out there, you know, in the element, serving
Wearing that
people.
coat that says FBI on it. Tell me no. I mean, because even when I was a kid, you know, who didn't want that FBI coat? It always looks cool, man.
Or CIA operative, or whatever you want to
Yeah,
say, you
yeah,
know, James
exactly.
Bond. I mean, that's what I wanted. So this career I got into, and this is a big part of what I talk about now. I think we get into these portfolio careers sometimes out of necessity. And I think that's what happened to me, because when the FBI didn't come to fruition, it's not like you go into this thinking that the government isn't going to come through. It was a big learning lesson for me coming out of it. But I didn't really have a plan B, because who would have thought that Quantico wouldn't have happened? So I really had to do some unorthodox things at the time to get myself in a position to be hired in a quick manner, because you can't live without pay, right? And
Right. No, yeah.
I feel blessed that I got the opportunity to go to Booz, and who had you know, a great transition, much better than many companies, in bringing veterans into it and kind of retraining them from the military world to what it was going to take in the civilian world. So I think that was a really lucky break for me when I look back upon it.
Nice. Yeah, so you know, now that you've been out and stuff, like talk more about that kind of life for you, and you know what kind of led you into being an author and starting a podcast, and you know, kind of, you know, what, how did you stumble, you know, down this path?
So one of the core messages I'm really trying to tell people today, especially the younger generations coming up, is they're going to have to become experts at a couple different disciplines. One is being a constant learner, because the pace of change, the pace of technology adoption is happening at such a quick manner that the only way that you're going to stay relevant is by constantly learning and constantly staying ahead of the trends. And what that leads to is the second thing that you're going to have to be extremely good at, which is reinventing yourself. And I know that this is something that I've had to do multiple times throughout my career. And it's really become something I've become very good at. But for most people, it's not a natural thing. It sure wasn't for me at the beginning. And then I would say the third thing is you really have to double down on those things that AI isn't going to impact, which is really your adaptability equation and emotional intelligence. Because regardless if AI is there, if robots are there, et cetera, we are still going to have to work with humans. And I think that skill set is going to become even more important in the future. So those three things really became defining elements of my career. So if I look at the transition from Booz Allen to then I went to Anderson Consulting, I did so because at Booz, I was still working primarily on government types of contracts, and I really wanted to get more exposure to the civilian world. And that transition took me from San Diego to Houston. And at the beginning, it was a great transition because it was the largest office that Arthur Andersen at the time had. And so it gave us plenty of opportunity to get your hands dirty into different things. And we were big in the energy area, but I also had the opportunity, because I was leading the cybersecurity practice, to get very involved in high and medium growth companies. The thing I didn't expect, which caused me to reinvent myself again, was one of our major clients, in fact, the largest one in the firm, was Enron. And we got caught up in the epicenter of the demise of that whole company, which took down all of Arthur Andersen in a matter of 2 to 3 weeks. And so I found myself again in this position where life threw a curveball at me and I had to adapt. And so I decided this time, I had done the consulting thing now for about 7, 8 years. It was now time to try something different. And you ask about, are there points in my life when I look back and sometimes wish I would have done something different? This would have been one of those times where I wish I had a little bit more time to think about it, because I probably would have gone back and pursued something different. But I ended up going in and pursuing a role as a business executive in Fortune 500 companies. So the first role I took on was I was the first chief information security officer. And this was when the CISO was a relatively new job for a $15 billion company in Australia called Lendlease. And that was really fascinating for me because it was the first time that I really got immersed in global operations, got to live again in another country, and was part of something on a global scale where I was again feeling like I was making a huge difference. I spent a few years there and had the opportunity, because of my security background, to get recruited to go to Lowe's Home Improvement. And the reason I was brought in, a lot of people probably don't realize this, but in 2005, Lowe's at that time had the largest hack ever in retail happen to it. And so I was brought in to clean up that mess. And I took over operations, information security, kind of that element of what we were doing, but ended up cleaning it up, ran application development, ended up becoming the chief data officer, and then was recruited to become a CIO at Dell as I left Lowe's, and then spent a few years working for Michael Dell, really at a transformational time for Dell as the company was transitioning from being a hardware provider to becoming a solutions provider. But along all this continuum, a lot of the stuff that I talked about earlier and how I approached those opportunities that I had as an officer when I would go on the ships, I really used those key learnings of being a servant leader, of never asking anyone that worked for me not to do a job that I was willing to roll my own sleeves up and do. And some of the secrets, I think, to my success were I would spend time learning who my people were and what motivated them. Because I think when we look at why so many people are disengaged today, it really comes down to the cultures of the companies that we're in. And what I found is that oftentimes we look at an individual in the pigeonhole that we find them in when we arrive at a company, meaning we don't look at the fact that John might have done all these things before the job that they're currently in, nor have all these aspirations outside of work, whether it's buying a house, going back to school, raising a family, becoming a musician. I don't care what it is. We tend to only treat people in a limited way instead of really looking at them as a whole person and helping them see that they matter and that we're here to really propel all their life to the next level. And so I really took that approach into my leadership roles. And I think it was so transformational into why I was able to take low performing teams and over a very short period of time, a year to 2 years, take them from being low performing to some of the highest performing in the organizations. And so I really became known for being a transformational type of leader, turnaround type of leader. And that then led me from my experiences at Dell to going into private equity and going in and turning around private equity owned companies and basically transforming them from within. And so how did that lead me to what I'm doing today? I guess along the way, it goes back to what I was describing before. I never in a million years ever dreamed that I was going to be this Fortune 500 business executive. That never was what excited me. And I just reached a point where I realized I was dedicating so much time, sweat, energy, my entire life at making other people a lot of money, making other companies' dreams come true, but I wasn't really fulfilling what I felt was my purpose in helping people live meaningful lives. And so I really reached a point that Henry David Thoreau calls quiet desperation, where I think we fall into this trap. I certainly did, where it was the high achievement, it was the titles, it was the positions after a while, the money, the accolades that was really driving my motivation instead of the intrinsic things in life that truly matter. And I I came to this point where I realized that, picture yourself living your life on a stool, kitchen stool, and it's got multiple supports. In my case, one of those supports, the constant grind, was way overcompensating for the other elements in my life, and I was completely out of balance. So what I found myself was in this deep state of apathy, of burnout, of just not really feeling like anything I was doing was truly mattering. And I realized that I had to cross the chasm that was staring in front of me. I could continue down this path of doing what I was doing, or I could take this leap of faith and try to pursue becoming the ideal self that I had always desired to become. And so that really launched me on a period of what now is 7 to 9 years of rediscovery, of really doing the work of reinventing myself my whole life. And what I talk about now in Passion Struck is that whole journey and what it's created now as a result. And I outline in the book that you just put up, Passion Struck, really the 12 principles that I learned from studying luminaries that are all around us, everything from Michael Dell, who I talked about, to Mark Benioff, to Derek Jeter, to Oprah, and applying these disciplines into my own life and seeing that they worked. And really realizing that I was onto something here, a methodology that could transform lives. And I wanted to start sharing it out into the world. And so that's why I started my podcast, The Whole Passion Struck Movement, and what I'm doing with the book.
That's awesome. I mean, there's a lot of people that I think would be afraid to make the moves that you made too. I mean, a lot of people get complacent and don't are too afraid to go somewhere else. We loyal. Some people get too loyal, right? And are afraid to move. Now, did you move by opportunity, or was it that you just felt like you were ready to move on and do something else with each of these companies? How did your transformation end up going?
Well, it was really looking at the opportunities, looking at the landscape, and seeing what the most direct path was for me to take on more responsibility. So at Lendlease, for instance, we had gone from being headquartered in Australia to then moving the headquarters to the UK, and then we're going to then move it back to Australia. And it was just too many moves in too short a period of time. And it's very difficult as an expat to find a job in the United States when you're in Australia. And I had an opportunity where I went back stateside in Atlanta, and it was much easier at that point to transition. Plus, when a huge company like Lowe's offers you a VP position where you're going to be the youngest vice president in the entire company, how can you turn something like that down? The opportunity at Dell was more strategic. I knew I wanted to be a CIO. The path for me to achieve that at Lowe's was taken away because they hired Korn Ferry, which is an executive search firm, to come in. They redid the org chart. And when they did, the position that was directly in front of mine was designated a diversity position. And so it could only be filled by female or a person of color, of which I was neither. And so I no longer had a path to the goal that I wanted, which was to become the CIO. So it kind of forced my hand into doing something different. And to be honest, coming out of Dell, I was just really burnt out on the big company thing. And I found myself, the more senior I got, getting more and more away from the things that truly brought me joy and happiness, which were the things that really resulted from me rolling up my sleeves. And I found by going into private equity, where the majority of the companies that we were working on were anywhere from like 200 million in revenue to a couple billion, they were smaller ships to go into where you had the ability to do more in your positions because they didn't have as many people doing things, so to speak. So for me, it was a great way to get back into really using some of the individual contributor elements, strategy, creativity, a lot of the things that really let me up inside.
Now, in terms of passion struck, how did you get yourself to? Did you write the book first, or did you start the podcast, or did it kind of all come together? What all made you say, like, you know what, I'm gonna write this book? Or what got you going, like, initially?
So the history is I started doing all this research that I talked about somewhere in the neighborhood of 2015. And I was at this point where I think we all see this chasm that we could possibly cross. It's as if you're on a mountaintop and you're looking on one side and you see what your life looks like now, and then you see the horizon and another mountaintop with what it could look like. And where it gets really scary is, how do you cross those two mountainsides? And that fear held me back for a period of time until I was really faced with two events that happened within a few days of each other. I remember it was November. I had taken my daughter to school. I was going to Orange Theory, where I would normally work out, and we had an electrical fire in the air conditioning system in the gym. And so I went home a lot earlier than I normally would have. And unbeknownst to me, someone had been canvassing my whereabouts, my patterns, etc., and had unfortunately used that day as the day that they knew I was going to be out of the house, and they decided to rob me. And so I walked in on a burglary that I stepped into, where I was faced or confronted with the burglar, who was holding my own handgun, pointing it at me from the top of the stairs. And so I don't know about you, but it brought me right back into combat situations, everything else, where, you really have two choices to make. Either you were going to go up that hill and try to take him down, hoping
fight or flight,
get
man.
shot.
Yeah.
And, I decided in that instant that my opportunity for staying alive was to get the hell out of there and live to fight another day. And then as I'm trying to process that, a few days later, my best friend committed suicide. And as I processed both of those events over the next few weeks and months, it really just hit me that what am I waiting for? Life is finite, and I could make all the excuses in the world not to pursue doing what I feel compelled to do, or I could make the change. And so that started me on this journey of then researching, really doing years of inner work, really getting to know myself again and what really made me tick, what motivated me. And then I had the opportunity along the way, as I was working in private equity, to work in this company that actually had a publication. And I guess I always loved to write, but I never thought of myself as a writer until I started acting as their editor-in-chief and associate publisher. And I started writing blogs and doing other things, and I really enjoyed it. And so the backstory of Passion Struck was I had wanted to start sharing the ideas that had come from my personal journey. And I started to talk to book agents, and the book agents all were rejecting me left and right. I mean, it was crazy. I think like 75 rejected me. And they all said, although I had this great business career, I didn't have a personal brand. And how would I know that any of the things that I wanted to teach, people would even want to listen to, much less feel that they were effective? And so at that point, because it was COVID, I really didn't have an opportunity to public speak, which is what they wanted me to do. So I decided that the podcast was the best way to try these things out. So in February 2021, I started the podcast to test out the concepts. And after about 2.5 years, during that time, I started working on the book, and the podcast ended up amplifying the things I wanted to do in the book, because it really brought neuroscience, psychology, behavior science into the topics that I had wanted to write about. And that's what ultimately culminated in the book coming out. Is I now had a platform and a big enough personal brand where agents and publishers finally were starting to take notice. But I have to tell you, when I started this whole thing, Passion Struck didn't even exist in my mind. The whole origin of that was, I happened to be talking to a friend of mine, Keith Crotch, and I was telling him about this transformation that I see people make, where all of a sudden they become so enthralled by a cause or a movement or whatever it is, that they're so compelled to want to fix it that they're willing to risk everything, whether it's their relationship, their financial security, to go after it, and to do so with 110% of their energy. And he goes, it looks like you're talking about someone who goes from being stuck to becoming passion struck. And right when he said it, I knew those were the two words. And luckily, as fate would have it, I went to GoDaddy and it was right there for the taking. So that became the genesis of Passion Struck.
Wow. Now, with your podcast and stuff as well, do you have guests on, or, are you doing that solo?
So I started out doing 2 episodes a week. One was with a guest, one was a solo. And about a year into it, maybe 14, 15 months into it, I reached the point where I had a pretty long backlog of guest interviews. And so I decided at the time that I was going to do the short-term thing of introducing a second interview per week, which now I've been doing for 3 years, and we're up to 480 episodes. So I typically do two interviews a week, one solo episode. If I have a lot going on, sometimes the solo episodes I will fill with a guest spot, especially if I've built up a big catalog of them. But yeah, I've had a ton of guests, everyone from General McChrystal to Admiral Stavridis, astronauts, military astronauts, Chris Cassidy, Wendy Lawrence, Kayla Barron, to name a few, and all kinds of other Rangers, SEALs, admirals, generals, you name it. So I think I've done about 80 veteran focused podcasts, but much more of the podcast has been focused on behavior science, psychology, neuroscience, and then core leadership and self-help type of topics.
Nice. And do you have any plans on where you're going to go with it, or is this something you're just going to keep going in as long as you want to? I mean, do you have kind of goals for this whole thing, or?
Yeah, my goal is really to become a content empire. Really, what I am trying to do is I really think that one of the core things that is impacting people today is a feeling of unmattering, like you're not living a life of significance. So just as Disney, their mission statement is to create the happiest place on earth, I'm trying to create the most intentional place on earth by teaching people why through living an intentional life, making choices that steer you closer to where you want to be, you can create a life of significance for yourself and not end up being 70, 80 years old with a whole bunch of regrets for not going down the path of pursuing becoming your ideal self. So right now, I have this book. I have other books that I want to write in the future. We're working on the Passion Struck University. We're working on additional shows that we're going to launch. But the bigger aspect of this would be getting into comic books, getting into comics in general, getting into more children's areas, because I think the younger that we can teach children some of these core life skills, the more important it is for them as they get older.
Right, because we're losing a lot of it, so it helped to have more education in those areas, because I think we're losing some of the things that are very valuable to having a successful future for us. Now, in terms of writing books, are you done with writing books? You're gonna keep on. You have another book in the writing and in the making.
I have 3 topics already I would love to write about. And I know the next book I would like to write, I'm trying to, since my book just came out in February, I'm still trying to push it, as I'm trying to get my agent to look for deals for the next book. But I'm really feel fortunate that Passion Struck has gotten so much awards already, and it's only been out 6 months. So we've received 6 major awards, and we're part of selected by the Next Big Idea Club as one of their must-read books. So that has been really rewarding and shows the power that the book has. And thank you there for highlighting it if you're watching this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, definitely go check it out over on Amazon. Passion Struck. So, for the people that are just listening, Passion Struck, 12 powerful principles to unlock your purpose and ignite your most intentional life. A lot of what you said does ring very true. I mean, to me, even, I don't think I went down the path of life that I had visioned myself or even wanted, right? I mean, I think when we're younger, we have a tendency to live a lot from others and invest more into others than we do into ourselves, right? And so by the time you start to realize, oh shoot, man, I've been sitting here just investing so much time and effort into this, I've forgot about me, and then at that point in time, you could be already lost. Things could, not be the way that you wanted them. But I think that a lot of that probably attributes to me being more concerned about a girlfriend or, being at home where I would have felt more like that was more of my comfort area, although it wasn't probably the best place for me, right? It was just because I was most comfortable there. So I that's what I felt like doing instead of when I was younger, and probably could have risked it a little bit more. And who knows where I could have ended if I really wanted to go down the path that I really wanted to, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely there, and I think that there's so many people who feel that they're living in this gap and can't get out of it. And let's face it, what ends up happening as you get older is you're kind of driven there. So all the responsibilities of life accumulate, and it becomes harder and harder to try to break free from it because you've got a certain social status that you've built up. You've got the neighborhood you live in, the car you drive, the salary that you've been accustomed to. All these things play into our mindset that we just can't see an alternate path. And so we get stuck in just going through the motions of where we're at. Like I said, in this portfolio type of career that we find ourselves in, kind of existing, but not really living. And I think once you get further into that, you really start feeling apathetic about your entire life and what meaning does it really hold. And I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. And then they're feeling this pressure of all the displacements that are happening, the resignations, everything. And it is just a compounding mess that is hitting people globally.
Yeah, that's 100%. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at a couple places to check you out. We got johnrmiles.com, and we'll go ahead and bring that up. If you want to kind of talk a little bit about your website and, just kind of run us through your website.
Yeah, well, my website, both of them tie, both my personal website, John R. Miles, and the company website, Passion Struck, really tie into this core concept of mattering. And I really think that this is something that needs a lot more attention. And so on my website, the tagline reads, "Live your life so it matters." And what I mean by that is our life all comes down to the choices that we make. And that's what I try to talk about on the website, in the blog post that I do on it. From that website, you can get to the podcast, you can get to the book, but I'm trying to put out as much free information as I can to help people who are interested learn how they can change their life and take it to a different level. The difference between my personal website and Passion Struck is mine is more focused on me individually. Passion Struck is more focused on the company, our coaching, and other things that we do. So that's really the differentiation point between the two, but they definitely play on each other.
Yeah, I see. That's awesome, man. I mean, and like you said, look at the awards already. That's amazing. That is quite amazing. Already, you said February came out, right?
Came out in February, and I've been really lucky to have some great endorsements from people like Mark Hyman, Seth Godin, Mike Michalowicz, and others. So I mean, all this stuff never in a million years that I think was going to happen. And sometimes people ask me, how did you get the endorsements? Like, why would people give them to you? And I have to tell you, like when I was first asking these people, I remember reaching out to Seth Godin, and I was so nervous, but I thought, what is the worst thing that he could say? No. And, he ended up loving the book and asking if he could be the lead endorser. And did I get a couple turndowns? Yes. But by and large, I got far more acceptances from people who wanted to back the work and what I was doing. So I just feel very fortunate for the people who have come behind me and who are supporting what this whole mission that we're trying to do with the book and the Passion Struck movement in general.
Outstanding, man. That's great. Well, I guess you're gonna keep yourself nice and busy, and that you do public speakings and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, I do. I just finished up a couple new speaking reels, but I'm represented by Harry Walker, agency. And so that's a key plan for the future, is getting on stages and really talking about this, in addition to the podcast audience, to more business and organizations and churches and other things, and really getting the message out there. And for some of the more civic type of organizations, I talk more about a personal message. When I'm talking to companies, I really talk about how do you create passion-struck cultures. And the reason that we're facing so much disengagement, and how to start treating your employees as if they truly matter, and seeing them as who they are holistically, instead of pigeonholing them into the job that they're doing, and really trying to get the line of sight between the jobs they're doing and what the company is trying to accomplish, and how they matter in fulfilling that.
That's outstanding. Now, is there anything else that you would like to touch on, or anything that maybe we forgot during this interview that you'd like to share?
I think the only thing I would like to say is that we've covered the book at a very high level. The whole thing is based on something that I call the passion struck model. And so there are 3 core components that are in the book. There are mindset shifts, behavior shifts, and then something that brings it all together that I call the psychology of progress, which is how to use the compounding effect of mattering, intrinsic motivation, and deliberate action to not only come up with your passion, but to fuel it. And so the book, in the first 2 parts, really gives you 12 key principles that you can use to do it. And the last part of the book really shows you how to implement it in your life, with a key guide that will show you where you sit. You can go to our website and take the Passion Struck quiz. What's your starting point, and how your life is changing as you're implementing more of these principles along the way.
That's outstanding. I love it. And it makes a lot of sense, and it's a lot of things I talk about, because I mindset is a big thing in terms of being able to move forward and have a healthier version of yourself. Because when your mindset's bogged down with things that you don't ever want to deal with, or you don't want to face, everything else that comes in there makes it seem like it's a travesty, and you overreact, and nothing ever is getting solved. So mindset's a big thing, I think, in a lot of these things. And I like how you tie it all together, right? I mean, this is a lot of it is us, right? We're the biggest enemies of ourselves. We're the biggest critic. We're usually the most critical of ourselves and the hardest on ourselves. We lack the believing in ourselves. We don't know how to laugh at ourselves. We take ourselves too serious, all these things. And it's time to kind of realize that you need to have a little bit more self-awareness and care about yourself, be able to laugh at yourself, appreciate yourself, realize that you need to have, you deserve that opportunity to have a clear mind as well. So that way you can give everybody the best version of your absolute self.
Absolutely. And that's what the whole movement is all about, is helping people do that.
Great. I love it. All right, man. Well, like I said, is there any other thing else? Last little words that you might want to say to anybody? I really appreciate you coming on, talking about your experiences, talking about your book, and all the things you got going on. But is there any last words you would like to say?
Well, Brian, I just appreciate you having me on the show. I know a lot of your listeners are veterans, and it's always such an honor when I get to be in front of fellow veterans. And I'm so thankful for those, especially who served a lot longer than me, were in more arduous situations than me. I've been there to part of it, but I know what so many of you have gone through and what it takes to rebuild your life from it. So, I just wanted to put it out there, my thanks and appreciation for all the veterans who are part of your community.
Well, sir, I thank you for your service and everything you've done, and we appreciate you. Semper Fi.
Hurrah.
All right, friends and family. Well, that's going to wrap up another great interview. I appreciate you guys for continuously tuning in, liking the show, sharing it out. Remember, if you guys haven't had the chance, go check out the website, USMCVet.com. That's where you can check out all the latest interviews, all the ones that we did last year, and everything that we're going to be continuing to do. We try to put our nonprofit organizations there, veteran-owned businesses there as well. Try to help the community out as much as we can. Also, remember, check on your friends, your loved ones, your best friends. Make sure they're doing good. There's a number you can call right down there, Crisis Lifeline, 988. For veterans, press 1. You can talk to someone discreetly. But remember how I say it, don't let the day kick your ass. Make sure you're out there kicking it. Until next time, we'll see you guys all.